The gasps were almost as loud as the thunderous crash of the toppling display stand. One moment, Liam Sterling, the billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms with a glacial stare, was striding through the opulent lobby of his own corporation, a fortress of steel and ambition. The next, a whirlwind of flying files and soft pastel fabric tumbled directly into his path, and he caught her on pure, startled instinct. The entire world seemed to freeze. She was a flustered, warm weight in his arms, her face buried in the impeccable wool of his suit, the scent of vanilla and old paper replacing the usual sterile air. As she looked up, her eyes, wide and the color of warm honey, were pools of sheer, unadulterated horror. A single, stray paperclip was tangled in her chestnut hair. The crowd of sharp-suited employees watched, aghast. Liam Sterling, who publicly despised any form of clumsiness and privately loathed the calculated femininity so often thrust upon him, looked down at this human disaster, and for the first time in a decade, was struck utterly speechless. But how could one accident, one moment of chaotic gravity, change everything he thought he knew about love? Her name was Elara, and her life was a symphony of small, quiet notes played in a world that preferred grand, crashing cymbals. She was a junior archivist in the corporate library, a role that suited her perfectly, surrounded by the silent, non-judgmental company of books. Her tiny apartment was filled with thriving plants she talked to and second-hand novels with cracked spines. Her clumsiness was a constant, unwelcome companion. She tripped over perfectly flat pavement, spilled coffee on important documents, and could turn the simple act of carrying a stack of books into a high-stakes balancing act. Her colleagues in the sleek modern office often exchanged pitying smiles or exasperated eye rolls. "Poor Elara," they'd whisper, "so sweet but so inept." Yet when the senior archivist was ill, it was Elara who stayed until midnight, her shyness forgotten, to organize a century's worth of company records with meticulous, loving care. She brought homemade cookies for the weary night shift cleaners and always remembered the names of their children. What if the very flaws that made her invisible to the glittering world of power and prestige were the ones that could capture the most powerful man's heart? Liam Sterling's heart wasn't always a gated community. Once, it had been an open field, until a woman with a smile as sharp as diamonds and ambition in her eyes had taken a match to it. Isabella had been the epitome of high society glamour, her every word and gesture a carefully crafted performance designed to ensnare a wealthy future. She had succeeded, only to leave him publicly humiliated when a more lucrative prospect arose, telling him with a cold laugh that his workaholic nature was unbearably dull. From the ashes of that betrayal, Liam built an empire and a persona of impenetrable ice. He saw the same artifice everywhere, in the coy glances of socialites, the ambitious smiles of junior executives. He equated femininity with falseness, a beautiful trap he was determined to never fall into again. His towering penthouse was as sterile and lonely as he believed his heart had become. But was his heart really safe behind those towering walls, or had he just been waiting for the right person, someone completely and utterly real, to find the hidden key? Their paths, against all odds and corporate policy, began to cross. He found the report she'd accidentally left in the executive elevator, her handwritten notes in the margins insightful and surprisingly brilliant. He'd see her in the courtyard, patiently sharing her lunch with a skittish stray cat, talking to it in a soft, soothing voice. Each encounter was a crack in his fortified resolve. He started inventing reasons to visit the archives, drawn by the quiet peace she radiated. One rainy evening, he found her there alone, attempting to reach a heavy volume on the top shelf, standing precariously on a rolling ladder. "Let me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. As he handed her the book, their fingers brushed, and a simple electric current passed between them. Her blush was immediate and genuine, not a practiced flush, but a helpless, warm wave of color. He realized with a jolt that he hadn't seen a genuine blush in years. Could a single, unguarded moment of connection unravel a decade of carefully constructed defenses? He asked her to dinner, Not at a Michelin-starred restaurant where she'd feel out of place, but at a small, family-owned Italian place he remembered from before his fortune. She wore a simple blue dress and talked about her favorite novels and her dream of visiting the libraries of the world. She didn't try to impress him. She was just herself. She spilled a little water on the table and laughed about it, a sound that reminded him of wind chimes. Liam, for the first time, didn't have to be the CEO. He could just be Liam. He found himself telling her about his boyhood dream of being a pilot, a secret he'd buried under years of balance sheets and acquisitions. They walked her home under the stars, and the silence between them was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. As they reached her door, she looked up at him, the city lights reflecting in her honest eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for tonight, Liam." It was the first time she'd said his name. He knew then, with terrifying clarity, that he was in deep, irrevocable trouble. What happens when the man who controls everything realizes his heart is no longer his to command? Their world became a delicate, beautiful secret. Picnics in hidden parks, shared laughter over her latest clumsy mishap, late-night phone calls where they talked about everything and nothing. He saw the strength in her kindness, the sharp intelligence behind her shyness. She saw the lonely boy within the formidable man, the man who longed for authenticity in a world of replicas. He was preparing to introduce her to his world properly, to shield her from the vipers and the gossip, when his past walked back into his present. Isabella, more polished and predatory than ever, appeared at a charity gala he was obligated to attend, her arm linked with a business rival. She sought him out, her eyes sweeping over Alara, who looked beautifully out of place in her simple gown. "Oh, Liam," Isabella purred, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "you always did have a soft spot for charity cases." The barb hit its mark not on Liam but on Alara, whose face paled. The whispers began, a toxic cloud of gold digger and clumsy nobody. Liam, furious, moved to intervene, but Alara placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Don't," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You'll only make it worse." In that moment he saw the light in her eyes flicker, threatened by the harsh winds of his reality. Would the cruel judgment of his world shatter the fragile trust they had built? Or could their love prove strong enough to silence the whispers forever? The confrontation left a chill. Alara, who had never cared for wealth or status, was now painfully aware of the gulf that the world saw between them. She started pulling away, believing her presence was damaging his reputation, that her simple love was a burden to his complicated life. Liam could feel her slipping through his fingers, and the fear was more paralyzing than any corporate takeover. He found her in the archives, meticulously sorting documents, her back to him. "Alara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She turned, and the quiet sorrow in her eyes broke him. "I can't do this, Liam," she said softly. "I can't be the reason you become a laughingstock. I'm not like the women in your world. I'll only ever be me." He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his, the ones that had fumbled so many things but had so gently held his heart. "Alara," he breathed, his gaze intense, "look at me. You are the only real thing I've found in that world. Your kindness, your honesty, the way you see the world. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever known. I don't want a perfect porcelain doll. I want the woman who isn't afraid to be flawed because her flaws are what make her perfect to me." He dropped to one knee, right there amidst the dusty archives and towering shelves of stories, and her breath hitched. But as he reached into his pocket, the door to the archives flew open, and his stern-faced head of security stood there, his expression grave. "Mr. Sterling," he said urgently, "there's been a security breach. The board is convening an emergency meeting. They're saying it's an inside job, and they have evidence pointing to someone with access to the historical financial records." Liam's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Alara's, which were now wide with a new, different kind of fear. The question hung in the dusty, silent air between them, heavy and terrifying. Was the greatest threat to their love not the judgment of others, but a betrayal from within? The symphony of clicking heels and murmured conversations in the Sterling Corp lobby came to a screeching halt, punctuated by the sharp clatter of a tablet hitting marble and a soft, startled gasp. One moment, Liam Sterling was a fortress of tailored ambition, cutting through his domain with an aura of impenetrable ice. The next, a whirlwind of soft pink cardigan and flying paperwork tumbled directly into his path, and his arms shot out on pure, startled instinct to catch her. The crowd froze. She was a warm, flustered weight against his chest, her face, for a heart-stopping second, buried in the fine wool of his suit, smelling faintly of vanilla and rain. When she looked up, her eyes, wide and the color of warm honey, were pools of such sheer, unadulterated horror that he felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. A single, wayward paperclip was tangled in her chestnut hair. The employees watched, aghast. Liam Sterling, the man who publicly despised incompetence and privately loathed the calculated charm of social climbers, looked down at this human personification of a minor disaster, and for the first time in a decade, found himself utterly, completely speechless. But how could one accident, one chaotic collision of two different worlds, change everything he thought he knew about love? Her name was Ilara, and her life was a quiet sonnet whispered in a world that only shouted. She was a junior archivist, a role that suited her beautifully, surrounded by the silent, steadfast companionship of books in the corporate library's forgotten corner. Her small apartment was a sanctuary of thriving plants she nurtured with a quiet dedication and well-loved novels with dog-eared pages. Her clumsiness was a lifelong clumsy dance partner. She tripped over perfectly visible lines on the floor, spilled tea on keyboards with an almost supernatural precision, and could turn the simple act of carrying a stack of folders into a precarious Jenga game. Her colleagues, with their sharp suits and sharper ambitions, often offered her pitying smiles or exasperated sighs. "It's just Ilara," they'd say, a phrase that simultaneously dismissed and defined her. Yet when the senior archivist fell ill, it was Ilara who worked tirelessly through the night, her shyness forgotten in her dedication, organizing decades of corporate history with a gentle, meticulous touch. She secretly left pastries for the overnight cleaning staff and always remembered to ask about their families. What if the very flaws that made her invisible to the cutthroat world of power and prestige were the ones that could, against all odds, capture the most powerful man's heart? Liam Sterling's heart wasn't always a locked vault. Once, it had been an open garden, until a woman named Isabella, with a smile as sharp as shattered glass and ambition running through her veins like ice, had taken a torch to it. She had been the epitome of polished perfection, her every laugh, every tear, a meticulously rehearsed performance designed to secure a life of luxury. She had succeeded, only to leave him standing alone at the altar, a note explaining that his obsessive work ethic was too dull for her dazzling future. From the ashes of that very public humiliation, Liam built an empire and a persona of glacial detachment. He saw Isabella's falseness in every coy glance across a boardroom, every perfectly timed laugh at a charity gala. He had come to equate femininity with deception, a beautiful, gilded cage he vowed never to enter again. His sterile penthouse, with its panoramic city views, was as empty and cold as he believed his heart had become. But was his heart truly safe behind those imposing walls of his own making, or had he just been waiting, all this time, for someone completely and utterly real to find the hidden, forgotten path back in? Their worlds, defying all corporate logic and social strata, began to gently orbit one another. He discovered a report she had accidentally left in the executive lounge, her handwritten notes in the margins revealing an insight and intelligence that the dry text lacked. He'd glimpse her in the private courtyard, patiently coaxing a frightened stray kitten from under a bench with a soft, soothing voice and a piece of her sandwich. Each small, unguarded moment was a hairline fracture in the ice around his heart. He began to find excuses to descend to the archives, drawn by the profound peace that seemed to emanate from her corner of the world. One evening, with a storm lashing against the windows, he found her there, balanced precariously on the top of a rolling ladder, stretching for a heavy, leather-bound volume. "Allow me," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. As he handed her the book, their fingers brushed, and a jolt, simple and electric, passed between them. Her blush was immediate, a helpless, warm wave of color that traveled from her cheeks to the tips of her ears. It was the most genuine thing he had witnessed in years. Could a single, unscripted touch truly begin to melt a decade of frozen solitude? He asked her to dinner, not to some intimidating starched tablecloth establishment, but to a small, family-owned Italian trattoria he remembered fondly from his university days, a place untouched by the glitter of his success. She wore a simple, sunflower yellow dress and spoke with passionate, unpretentious intelligence about her favorite authors and her dream of walking through the ancient libraries of Europe. She made no attempt to charm him. She was simply, authentically herself. She knocked over her glass of water and laughed, a sound so light and genuine it seemed to brighten the entire room. Liam, for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't have to be the CEO. He could just be Liam. He found himself confessing his boyhood dream of being an astronaut, a secret he'd buried under mountains of financial reports and acquisitions. They walked to her apartment under a canopy of stars, and the silence between them was not empty, but full, comfortable, and brimming with a newfound understanding. At her door she looked up, the city lights catching the gold in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for tonight, Liam." It was the first time she had ever spoken his given name, and it sounded like a secret benediction. He walked away knowing, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that he was falling, and there was no safety net in sight. What happens when a man who has spent his life building walls realizes, too late, that he has accidentally built them around the one person who makes him feel truly free? Their romance became a cherished private universe. There were stolen picnics in sun-dappled parks where she'd trip over a root and he'd catch her, their laughter mingling in the air. There were late-night phone calls where they talked about their childhood fears and their simplest joys. He saw not weakness in her shyness, but a deep, observant strength. He saw not incompetence in her clumsiness, but a refreshing lack of self-consciousness. She, in turn, saw past the formidable CEO to the lonely, thoughtful man who longed for a genuine connection in a world of transactional relationships. He was planning to formally introduce her to his life, to shield her from the inevitable scrutiny, when his past resurfaced with a venomous smile. Isabella, more polished and predatory than ever, appeared at a high-profile charity gala he was contractually obliged to attend, her arm linked with his most bitter business rival. Eyes cold and assessing swept over Alara, who looked beautifully, heartbreakingly real in her simple, elegant gown. "Oh, Liam," Isabella purred, her voice a silken dagger, "it's so noble of you, always taking in the strays." The intended blow landed not on Liam's pride but on Alara's heart. He watched the light in her eyes dim, saw the familiar shadows of self-doubt cloud her expression as the whispers of gold digger and clumsy misfit began to swirl around them like a toxic fog. Liam, his protective instincts roaring to life, moved to confront the crowd, but Alara's trembling hand on his arm stopped him. "Please don't," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You'll only make it a bigger spectacle." In that moment, he saw the beautiful, fragile trust they had built begin to tremble under the weight of his world's cruel judgment. With the biting words and scornful glances of the world, he commanded be the very thing that shattered the most precious connection he had ever known. The aftermath of the gala cast a long, cold shadow. Alara, who had never desired his wealth or status, became painfully aware of the chasm the outside world perceived between them. She started to retreat, believing with every fiber of her being that her presence was a liability to his impeccable reputation, that her simple, clumsy love was an anchor dragging down his soaring life. Liam could feel her pulling away, slipping through his fingers like grains of sand, and the fear that gripped him was more paralyzing than any corporate disaster. He found her in the archives, her back to him, meticulously sorting through a collection of old blueprints, her shoulders slumped with a sorrow that felt like a physical weight in the room. "Alara," he said, his voice rough with a desperation he made no effort to conceal. She turned, and the quiet devastation in her eyes felt like a punch to his soul. "I can't do this, Liam," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I'm not like the women you're supposed to be with. I don't know how to play their games. I'll only ever be me." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, capturing her hands, the same hands that fumbled with coffee cups and door handles but that held his heart with such exquisite care in his own. "Alara," he breathed, his gaze intense, unwavering, "look at me. You are the only real thing I've found in that entire, glittering, fake world. Your kindness, your honesty, the way you see straight into the heart of things. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever known. I don't want a perfect, polished statue. I want the woman who isn't afraid to be perfectly, beautifully imperfect. I want you." As the words hung in the air, a profound declaration against the dusty silence of the archives, he knew with every fiber of his being what he had to do. He released one of her hands and slowly, deliberately, began to lower himself to one knee. But just as his knee touched the cold, hard floor, the heavy oak door to the archives burst open. His head of security, a man whose face was usually an impassive mask, stood there, his expression grim. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice tight with urgency, "we have a situation. The board is convening an emergency meeting. There's been a major security breach of our financial servers." The initial forensic trail. It points to someone with deep-level access to our historical records. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Alara's, which were now wide with a new, chilling kind of fear. The air grew thick, the romantic moment shattered by an accusation that hung between them, unspoken and terrifying. Could the greatest threat to their future be not the judgment of the outside world, but a betrayal from the one place he had finally learned to trust? The air in the Sterling Corp lobby, usually a crisp cocktail of ambition and anxiety, shattered into 1,000 silent, starring pieces. It happened in a blur of falling bodies and flying paperwork. Liam Sterling, a monument of tailored perfection and controlled power, was marching towards his destiny, his mind already on a multi-million-dollar merger. And then she stumbled. Not a graceful, calculated stumble, but a genuine, chaotic trip over a perfectly flat seam in the marble floor, sending her and a mountain of archived files directly into his path. His arms, reacting on pure instinct, shot out and caught her. The crowd gasped. She was a soft, warm weight against his chest, a jumble of pastel cardigan and startled, flailing limbs. The scent of vanilla and old books, so alien in this sterile environment, assaulted his senses. As she looked up, her honey-colored eyes wide with mortification, a single, defiant paperclip clung to a strand of her chestnut hair. Liam Sterling, the man who fired executives for a misplaced decimal point and whose disdain for artifice was corporate legend, stared down at this human hurricane of clumsiness and found the icy fortress of his composure cracking. But how could one unscripted moment, one collision of chaos and order, unravel a lifetime of carefully constructed beliefs about love? Her name was Alara, and she existed in the quiet margins of the roaring epic that was Sterling Corp. As a junior archivist. She lived amongst the whispers of history, surrounded by the gentle, forgiving silence of books. Her world was small and simple, a tiny apartment filled with thriving plants she talked to, a collection of well-loved novels with cracked spines, and the daily, hopeful ritual of not spilling her morning tea. Her clumsiness was a lifelong companion, an awkward dance she never quite learned the steps to. She was the woman who tripped over air, who could turn the simple act of carrying a coffee cup into a high-stakes balancing act. Her colleagues, in their sharp, intimidating armor of silk and ambition, often dismissed her with a pitying, "That's just Alara." Yet, beneath the shy smiles and fumbled words was a resilience forged in kindness. When the senior archivist fell ill, it was Alara who worked through the night, her quiet dedication a stark contrast to the daytime chaos, organizing a century of corporate records with a gentle, meticulous touch. She was the one who remembered the janitor's name and always brought an extra homemade cookie for the security guard on the night shift. What if the very traits that made her invisible to the glittering, cutthroat world of power were the very ones that held the power to captivate the man who commanded it all? Liam Sterling's heart was not always a frozen tundra. Once, it had been a fertile field, until a woman named Isabella, with a smile as sharp as a scalpel and ambition in her blood, had salted the earth. She was the epitome of high society gloss, her every tear and laugh a perfectly timed performance in a play to secure his fortune. She had succeeded in winning his trust, only to leave him standing at the altar, a coldly worded note stating that his emotionally stunted focus on work was too tedious for her dazzling future. From the ashes of that very public humiliation, Liam built an empire of steel and a persona of impenetrable ice. He saw Isabella's duplicity in every batting eyelash, every strategically placed compliment. He had come to believe that femininity and falseness were one and the same, a beautiful, gilded trap he was determined to avoid at all costs. His sprawling penthouse was a testament to his isolation, as cold and empty as the space he had carved out in his own chest. But was his heart truly safe behind those towering, icy walls, or had he just been waiting, all along, for a warmth genuine enough to begin the thaw? Their worlds, against all odds and corporate hierarchy, began to orbit a new shared sun. He found a report she had accidentally left in the executive elevator, her handwritten notes in the margins revealing a startling depth of insight into the company's history. He'd watch her from his office window, patiently coaxing a frightened stray kitten from the courtyard bushes with a soft voice and a piece of her sandwich. Each small, unvarnished moment was a chip in the glacier around his heart. He started inventing reasons to visit the archives, drawn by the profound sense of peace that seemed to radiate from her corner of the world. One evening, with a storm painting the skyscrapers in shades of gray, he found her there, perched precariously on the top of a rolling ladder, stretching for a heavy, leather-bound volume on the highest shelf. "Let me," he said, his voice softer than he'd used in years. As he handed her the book, their fingers brushed, and a spark, simple and electric, jolted through him. Her blush was immediate and utterly genuine, a helpless, warm wave of color that traveled from her cheeks to the tips of her ears. It was the most honest thing he had witnessed in a decade. Could a single, unguarded touch truly be enough to begin melting the permafrost of a lonely heart? He asked her to dinner, not to a place where the cutlery cost more than her monthly rent, but to a small, family-owned Italian restaurant he remembered from his struggling college days, a place that smelled of real garlic and warm bread. She wore a simple, cornflower blue dress and spoke with a passionate, unpretentious intelligence about poetry and her dream of seeing the northern lights. She made no attempt to flatter him. She was simply, completely herself. She knocked over her glass of water and laughed, a sound so light and free it seemed to chase the shadows from the corners of the room. Liam, for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't have to be the CEO. He could just be Liam. He found himself confessing his childhood dream of being a pilot, a secret he'd buried under a mountain of responsibility and spreadsheets. They walked to her apartment under a blanket of stars, and the silence between them was not empty, but full, comfortable, and humming with a newfound, terrifying hope. At her door she looked up, the city lights catching the gold flecks in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for tonight, Liam." It was the first time she had ever spoken his name, and it sounded like a coming home. He walked away that night knowing, with a dizzying certainty, that he was free falling, and the ground he had spent his life building was nowhere to be seen. What happens when a man who has spent a lifetime mastering control finds himself hurtling into the unknown, powerless to stop the fall? Their world became a cherished secret, a series of stolen moments that felt more real than anything in his public life. There were quiet picnics where she'd trip over a tree root and he'd catch her, their laughter echoing in the still air. There were late-night phone calls where they shared stories of their pasts, their fears, their simplest joys. He saw not incompetence in her clumsiness, but a refreshing lack of pretense. He saw not weakness in her shyness, but a deep, observant strength. She, in turn, saw past the formidable billionaire to the lonely, thoughtful man who yearned for a connection that wasn't transactional. He was preparing to bring her into the spotlight, to shield her from the vipers in his social circle, when his past returned with a venomous smile. Isabella, more polished and predatory than ever, appeared at a charity gala he was obligated to attend, her arm linked with his most bitter business rival. Her cold, assessing eyes swept over Alara, who looked breathtakingly real in her simple, elegant gown. "Oh, Liam," Isabella purred, her voice a silken blade. "How quaint. I see your taste has become more charitable." The intended blow landed not on Liam's pride but squarely on Alara's heart. He watched the light in her eyes dim, saw the familiar shadows of self-doubt cloud her expression as the whispers of gold digger and social climber began to swirl around them like a poisonous mist. Liam, his protective instincts roaring to the surface, moved to confront the crowd, but Alara's trembling hand on his arm stopped him. "Please don't," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It will only make it worse for me." In that moment, he saw the beautiful, fragile trust they had built begin to fracture under the immense weight of his world's cruel judgment. Would the very society he dominated become the weapon that destroyed the only genuine happiness he had ever known? The aftermath of the gala was a cold, gray dawn. Alara, who had never wanted his wealth or status, became agonizingly aware of the canyon the outside world saw between them. She started to retreat, pulling away, convinced that her presence was a stain on his impeccable reputation, that her simple, clumsy love was a burden his powerful life was not built to carry. Liam could feel her slipping away ghost-like through his fingers, and the fear that gripped him was more paralyzing than any boardroom coup. He found her in the archives, her back to him, her shoulders slumped as she pretended to organize a cart of returned books. "Alara," he said, his voice rough with a desperation he no longer cared to hide. She turned, and the quiet devastation in her eyes felt like a physical blow. "I can't do this, Liam," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I don't belong in your world. I'll never be polished or perfect. I'll only ever be me." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, capturing her hands, the same hands that fumbled with staplers and door handles, but that held his heart with an impossibly gentle strength in his own. "Alara," he breathed, his gaze intense and unwavering, "look at me. You are the only real thing I've found in that entire, glittering, artificial world. Your kindness, your honesty, the way you see straight into the heart of things. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever known. I don't want a perfect, polished statue. I want the woman who isn't afraid to be perfectly, beautifully human. I want you." As the words, a vow torn from the depths of his soul, hung in the dusty, silent air, he knew with every fiber of his being what he had to do. He released one of her hands and slowly, deliberately, began to lower himself to one knee. But just as his knee touched the cold, hard floor, the heavy oak door to the archives burst open. His head of security, a man whose face was usually an unreadable mask, stood there, his expression grim. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice tight with urgency, "we have a critical situation. The board is convening an emergency meeting. There's been a major security breach of our financial servers, the initial forensic trail. It points to someone with deep-level access to our historical records." Liam's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Alara's, which were now wide with a new, chilling kind of fear. The romantic moment shattered, replaced by a chilling silence broken only by the frantic beating of 2 hearts. The question now was no longer about love, but about loyalty, and the terrifying possibility that the greatest threat to their future had been hiding in the one place he had finally learned to call home. The accusation hung in the air, a toxic cloud suffocating the tender confession that had just begun to bloom. Liam's gaze remained locked with Alara, and in the expanse of that single, heart-stopping second, 1,000 questions warred with a single, steadfast certainty. He saw the shock in her eyes, the raw, uncomprehending fear. This was not the face of a traitor. This was the face of the woman who talked to plants and remembered everyone's coffee order, the woman whose greatest deception was trying to hide a blush. "Alara," he said, his voice low and firm, a command and a reassurance woven together. He rose to his full height, his posture shifting from a suitor to a commander in a fluid, powerful motion. He did not release her hand. "Mr. Sterling, the board is waiting," the security head, Evans, insisted, his eyes darting towards Alara with a flicker of suspicion. "They can wait," Liam stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned his full attention back to Alara, his thumb stroking a gentle, calming rhythm across her knuckles. "Look at me. Do you have any idea what he's talking about?" Her breath hitched, a small, shaky sound in the vast, silent room. "No, Liam, I swear I don't. I was organizing the old financial ledgers from the merger era, the paper ones, for digitalization. That's all. I wouldn't even know how to." Her voice trailed off, the sheer absurdity of the accusation rendering her speechless. He believed her. With every fiber of his being, he believed her. The evidence, whatever it was, had to be a mistake, a coincidence, or something far more sinister. The memory of Isabella's cold smile at the gala flashed in his mind, followed by the smug face of his rival, Alastair Thorne, whose company, Omnicorp, had been desperate to uncover Sterling Corp's strategic financial data for months. Was this their move? To discredit him by framing the one person he had let past his defenses? The thought sent a fresh wave of cold fury through him. "Evans," Liam said, his voice dangerously calm. "Secure the archive. No one in or out until I give the order. And I want the complete forensic report, all raw data, sent directly to my private terminal, not the board's, mine." Evans's eyes widened slightly, but he gave a sharp nod. "Understood, sir." As Evans spoke into his comms, Liam leaned closer to Alara, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes still wide with fear, but a flicker of determination igniting within them. "Yes." "Good. Go back to your desk. Act normal. Do not speak to anyone about this. I will handle everything." He gave her hand one final, firm squeeze before releasing it, the loss of contact feeling like a physical blow. He strode from the archives, Evans falling into step beside him, the air crackling with tension. The walk to the executive boardroom was a blur of polished floors and startled glances from employees who quickly averted their eyes. His mind was a whirlwind, piecing together the puzzle. The breach, the timing, the target, it was all too convenient. They weren't just after corporate secrets, they were after his heart. They were trying to destroy the one good, real thing in his life. The boardroom doors swung open to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. 12 of the most powerful people in the city sat around the gleaming mahogany table, their faces a mixture of anger, concern, and in the case of a few, thinly veiled opportunism. At the head of the table, the lead independent director, Mrs. Croft, a woman with steely gray hair and a gaze that could pin a butterfly to a corkboard, fixed him with a stern look. "Liam, thank you for joining us. We have a catastrophic situation. Omnicorp has somehow obtained our proprietary financial models for the next 5 years. They've already undercut our bid on the Ethelred acquisition." She gestured to the massive screen on the wall, where a complex digital trail was mapped out. "Our cybersecurity team has traced the initial data packet's origin. It was routed through a terminal with administrative-level access to the historical records server. The access logs show a login from the archive's primary terminal, user ID, eWillow. Alara, they had named her. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with unspoken accusation. All eyes were on him, waiting for his reaction. Would the cold, logical CEO sacrifice the clumsy girl to save his company? Was his judgment so clouded by emotion that he would risk it all? Liam walked slowly to his seat at the opposite end of the table from Mrs. Croft, his movements deliberate, his expression an unreadable mask. He placed his palms flat on the cool wood, leaning forward, his gaze sweeping across each board member. "I am aware of the situation," he began, his voice resonating with a calm authority that silenced the room. "And the evidence as presented is compelling, but it is also wrong." A murmur rippled through the room. "Liam, the data doesn't lie," one of the members interjected. "Data can be manipulated," Liam countered, his eyes narrowing, "and people can be framed. eWillow Alara is a junior archivist. Her role is to digitize paper records, not to access or understand live financial models. She lacks the technical knowledge to orchestrate this. This wasn't an inside job by a novice. This was a sophisticated attack designed to look like one. A convenient theory, Mrs. Croft said, her tone dry. But it doesn't change the facts on the screen, or the fact that you have a personal relationship with the primary suspect. It creates a conflict of interest, Liam, a severe one. This was the real battle, not over data but over perception, over trust. They were questioning his leadership, his judgment because of her. The very thing Alara had feared was coming true. He could feel the walls of his professional life closing in, threatening to crush the fragile happiness he had just found. "My personal life is not the issue here," Liam stated, his voice dropping a dangerous octave. "The issue is that Sterling Corp has been attacked. Our focus should be on the real perpetrator, not a pawn in their game. I am initiating a full external audit of our security protocols, and I am personally leading the investigation into Omni Corp's activities." "And the girl," Mrs. Croft pressed. "Standard protocol would demand her immediate suspension and a full investigation by security." Liam's jaw tightened. This was the cliff's edge. To protect her, he had to appear impartial. To save her, he might have to push her away. It was a cruel, impossible choice. He thought of her face, of the trust in her eyes just moments ago. "I need you to trust me." He took a slow, measured breath. "Alara Willow will be placed on a paid leave of absence, effective immediately," he declared, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. A few board members nodded in approval. "But," he continued, his voice sharpening, "she will not be subjected to a hostile internal investigation. I will be personally reviewing her work and access logs. If I find one shred of evidence that implicates her, I will handle it, but I am confident I will not." The room erupted into arguments, some calling for his head, others cautiously supporting his stance. Through the din, Liam's phone, face down on the table, lit up with a notification. It was from his private investigator, a man he had tasked with a very discreet, very personal inquiry weeks ago. The preview of the message was only 3 words, but they sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through his system. The message read, "Isabella and Alistair confirmed." He had his confirmation. The trap had been set by his past and his present rival. They had used his greatest weakness, his love for Alara, as the weapon. But as he looked around the chaotic boardroom, at the doubt and fear in the eyes of his directors, he realized the true battle was just beginning. He had to prove Alara's innocence without appearing blinded by love. He had to outmaneuver 2 of the most ruthless people he knew. And he had to do it all while the woman he loved was isolated, scared, and wondering if he had just abandoned her to the wolves. The weight of it all was immense, but as he remembered the feel of her hand in his, a fierce, protective resolve solidified within him. He would burn their entire world to the ground before he let them take her from him. The question was, would the flames consume him too? The boardroom's tension was a physical entity, thick enough to choke on. Liam's declaration hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown not just in defense of Alara, but in defiance of the board's very authority. He was staking his company, his reputation, everything he had built on the truth of a woman he had known for only a few months. The message on his phone burned in his mind. "Isabella and Alistair, confirmed." It was the linchpin. This wasn't a random corporate espionage case. It was a meticulously planned assassination of his character and his judgment, using Alara as the unwitting bullet. "Personal leave of absence, under your supervision." Mrs. Croft's voice was laced with icy disbelief. "Liam, that is not protocol. It reeks of favoritism at best and obstruction of justice at worst. The shareholders would have our heads if they knew we were handling a breach of this magnitude with such sentimentality." Liam didn't flinch. He met her gaze, his own now stripped of all corporate polish, revealing the raw, relentless will that had built Sterling Corp from the ground up. "Then I will address the shareholders directly," he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. I will tell them that while our systems were compromised by a coordinated attack from OmniCorp, our leadership was sharp enough to identify the true threat and is focused not on scapegoating an employee, but on reclaiming our competitive edge and fortifying our defenses. Or, he paused, letting the alternative hang in the air. I can tell them the board chose to waste valuable time and resources persecuting an innocent woman based on planted evidence, allowing the real culprits to solidify their advantage. Which narrative do you think will better serve our stock price? It was a brutal, masterful play. He was no longer just the CEO in love. He was the strategist reminding them why he was in charge. He reframed the crisis from a personal failure into an external attack, turning their suspicion back on themselves. The murmurs shifted in tone, from accusatory to calculating. Mrs. Croft studied him, her steely eyes searching for a crack in his armor. She found none. "You have 48 hours, Liam," she conceded, her voice tight. "You will present this board with irrefutable proof of this alleged conspiracy and the complete restoration of our data security. If you fail, your personal review of Ms. Willow's situation will become a formal, external investigation, and your position as CEO will be put to a vote. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly," Liam nodded, a cold fire in his eyes. He didn't wait for dismissal. He turned and strode from the room, the doors swinging shut behind him, silencing the renewed buzz of conversation. Evans fell into step beside him. "I need two things, Evans," Liam said, his pace never slowing as he moved towards his private elevator. "First, pull every piece of security footage from inside and outside this building for the past 72 hours. I want to see every person who came near the archives. Cross-reference with OmniCorp employee records and known associates of Alastair Thorne. And the second, sir, find out where Isabella is staying. I want to know her every move." Down in the archives, the silence was deafening. Alara sat at her desk, her hands trembling as she pretended to straighten a stack of papers. The security guard Evans had posted stood by the door, a silent, grim sentinel. The whispered words from the gala echoed in her mind: charity case, gold digger. Now they were being replaced by a far more terrifying label: traitor. How could this be happening? She thought of Liam's face as he knelt, the love and determination in his eyes, so quickly replaced by the shock of the accusation. Had he believed Evans? For a heart-wrenching moment, she wondered if his past, his deep-seated fear of betrayal, would override the trust they had built. Just as a tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek, her personal phone, tucked away in her desk drawer, vibrated with a text. It was from an unknown number. The data was transferred using a spoofed IP address mirroring your terminal. The login was automated, not manual. They used you as a ghost. Be careful. A friend. Alara's blood ran cold. Someone inside Sterling Corp was helping her, or were they setting a more elaborate trap? The message was both a reassurance and a new, terrifying mystery. She quickly deleted it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a simple archivist, a woman who loved quiet corners and old stories. She was not built for corporate espionage and secret messages. But for Liam, she would have to find a strength she never knew she possessed. Could she navigate this labyrinth of lies without losing herself, or him, in the process? Up in his penthouse office, the city sprawled like a map of his own ambitions and anxieties below him. Liam stood before a massive smart screen, the data from his investigator and Evans beginning to coalesce into a damning picture. There was a blurry image from a traffic camera near OmniCorp's headquarters, showing Isabella, clad in oversized sunglasses, entering a side entrance. Financial records showed a sudden, suspicious influx of capital into a shell company linked to Alastair Thorne. And the security logs, when analyzed with the information from Alara's mysterious text, which she had bravely, wisely forwarded to him, revealed the ghost in the machine. A sophisticated piece of code that had piggybacked on a routine system update to create a backdoor and mimic her login credentials. The pieces were there, but they were circumstantial. He needed a confession. He needed to look into the eyes of the people who had done this and make them break. His phone rang. It was Alara. Her voice was small, scared, but clear. "Liam, I got a text. I forwarded it to you. I don't know what it means, but I thought you should see it." Hearing her voice, the trust in it despite everything, was like a lifeline. "I saw it," he said, his own voice softening. "You did the right thing. Alara, I need you to listen to me. This is important. Did you notice anything unusual in the archives the past few days? Anyone who shouldn't have been there? Anything out of place?" There was a long silence on the other end. He could almost hear her thinking, sifting through her memories with the same meticulous care she used on the historical documents. "There was one thing," she said slowly. "The day before the gala, the fire alarm had a glitch, a short test in the old wing. It was only for a minute. But I saw someone from the IT department, a man I'd never seen before, coming out of the server closet next to the archives. He said he was checking the wiring. I thought it was odd because facilities usually handles that, not it." Liam's mind raced. The old wing systems were less monitored. A short, unexplained alarm test would be the perfect cover to physically install a device, a hardware keylogger or a signal booster, to facilitate the data theft. It was the missing link, the physical proof that the hack wasn't just remote. "You are brilliant," he breathed, a wave of awe and affection washing over him. "Alara, you are absolutely brilliant." Her shy, surprised smile was audible through the phone. "I just noticed." "Noticing is everything," he said. "Now I need you to do one more thing for me. It's a risk." "Anything," she whispered, and the conviction in that single word solidified his resolve. He outlined his plan, a dangerous gambit that relied on Alara playing the part of the scared, vulnerable target while he moved the final pieces into place. He was going to force Isabella and Alistair into the open. He was going to use their own arrogance against them. As he ended the call, he looked out at the glittering city, no longer a map of cold ambition, but a kingdom he would defend for the woman he loved. The final move was his. But in a game this dangerous, even the most powerful CEO couldn't predict every outcome. What if his plan to protect her ended up putting her in the direct line of fire? The plan was a delicate, dangerous dance, and every step had to be perfect. Liam's first move was one of public-facing capitulation. A tersely worded internal memo, leaked instantly to the press, announced that an employee in the Historical Archives Division was on administrative leave pending a full investigation into the security breach. It didn't name Alara, but the corporate gossip mill worked with ruthless efficiency. The narrative was set. The cold, logical CEO had chosen his company over his heart. He let the story fester, knowing Isabella's vanity would relish the perceived victory. Meanwhile, Alara played her part from the isolation of her apartment. She made a single, tearful call to a colleague she knew was a notorious gossip, whispering her fears that Liam had abandoned her, that she was being set up to take the fall. She let her voice break, let the performance of a heartbroken, terrified woman flow through the phone lines, straight into the ears of their enemies. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, to project such weakness when inside. A core of steel was forming, forged in the fire of Liam's unwavering belief in her. Liam's next move was a direct strike. He didn't call Alistair Thorne. He invited him, a summons to a neutral ground meeting to discuss the unfortunate circumstances regarding the Ethelred acquisition. It was a blatant power play, and Alistair, too arrogant to refuse, took the bait. The meeting was set for a private dining room at the Oculus, a restaurant known for its discretion and its soundproofed rooms. The night of the meeting, the air in the Oculus was thick with unspoken threats. Liam arrived first, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city's shimmering river. He looked every inch the untouchable CEO, but his mind was a whirlwind, thinking of Alara, alone and waiting for his signal. Alistair swept in moments later, a smug smile plastered on his face. "Liam, I must say I'm surprised you wanted to meet. I assumed you'd be busy managing your internal scandals. Some fires are easier to put out than others, Alistair, Liam replied, his voice calm. He didn't turn from the window, especially when you know who started them. Alistair's smile tightened. I hope you're not implying. I'm not implying anything, Liam interrupted, finally turning. His gaze was like a physical force. I'm stating a fact. You and Isabella conspired to steal my company's data and frame an innocent woman to destabilize my leadership. It was a clever plan, flawed but clever. Alistair barked a laugh, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's a fantastic story, Sterling. Do you have any proof, or just the ravings of a man blinded by a pretty face? This isn't a court of law, Alistair. This is the room where you decide how this ends. Liam took a slow step forward. You see, I have the financial trails. I have the security footage of your accomplice in the IT department planting the device during the fake fire alarm. And I have a witness who placed him there. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Alistair's face. A witness, your clumsy librarian, her testimony would be worthless. But hers isn't the testimony I need, Liam said, a cold smile touching his lips. He tapped a button on his phone. A moment later, the private door to the room opened, and Evans escorted a pale, trembling man in a rumpled IT uniform into the room. It was the man Ilara had described. Alistair's face went slack with shock. You. He was remarkably cooperative once we explained the prison sentence for industrial espionage, Liam said mildly. He confirmed everything. He identified you as the one who paid him. He even kept the prepaid burner phone you gave him. The man, whose name was Jerry, nodded frantically, unable to meet Alistair's furious gaze. It was him. He said it was just a prank, a corporate drill. I didn't know. Liam's attention was fixed on Alistair. So, here is your choice. You will publicly retract your bid for the Ethelred project, citing previously undisclosed financial miscalculations within Omni Corp. You will issue a formal, written apology to Sterling Corp for the unfortunate misunderstanding, and you will transfer the full amount you profited from this endeavor to a charity of my choosing. Or what? Alistair snarled, his composure shattered. Or, Liam said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, I release all of this, the evidence, the confession, the financial trails, not just to the press but to the federal authorities. You'll be lucky to run a lemonade stand when I'm through with you. Your company will be a footnote. And as for Isabella, he let the sentence hang, a promise of utter ruin. Alistair Thorne, a man who had built his empire on the backs of others, crumbled. The bluff and bluster evaporated, leaving a terrified man staring into the abyss of his own making. He gave a stiff, jerky nod. Fine. Wise decision, Liam said. He nodded to Evans, who led the terrified IT worker away. The documents will be delivered to your office by morning. Don't disappoint me, Alistair. As Alistair slunk out of the room, defeated and humiliated, Liam allowed himself a single, deep breath. One enemy was down, but the other, the architect of the emotional carnage, remained. Isabella. Dealing with her required a different kind of weapon. He pulled out his phone and sent a single-word text to Ilara. Now. Across the city, Ilara read the message, her heart leaping into her throat. This was it, the final act. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling only slightly, and dialed the number Liam had given her. It was Isabella's private line. The phone rang twice before a smooth, condescending voice answered. Yes. Isabella, this is Ilara Willow. We met at the gala. Ilara forced her voice to sound small and shaky, layering it with a desperate hope. I need to talk to you about Liam. There was a beat of silence, then a slow, intrigued purr. Oh, do tell. He's cut me off, Ilara whispered, pouring on the anguish. He believes the lies, he thinks I betrayed him. I have nowhere to go, but I have something. Something I found in the archives. Something I think you might want. It's about Liam's first company, the one before Sterling Corp, the records that were supposed to be sealed. It was a masterstroke, a lure crafted from Liam's own past. The failure of his first, small tech startup was a wound he rarely spoke of, and the details were indeed buried deep. Isabella's avaricious curiosity was her greatest weakness. Really? Isabella's voice was sharp with interest. And why would you give this to me? Because he hurt me, Alara said, the lie tasting bitter but necessary. And I want him to hurt too. I want you to have what I can't. I can meet you, tonight. The trap was set. Greed and spite, Isabella's twin motivators, did the rest. She agreed to a meeting at a secluded, high-end cocktail lounge, a place she felt was her territory, a stage where she could dominate. An hour later, Alara walked into the dim, opulent lounge, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw Isabella immediately, holding court in a plush circular booth, a vision of calculated elegance. She looked Alara up and down with a dismissive smirk. "Sit down, dear. You look a fright," Isabella said, gesturing to the seat opposite her. Alara sat, clutching her purse as if it were a lifeline. "I have the files here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "On a drive." "Let me see," Isabella demanded, her eyes gleaming. But before Alara could move, a familiar, authoritative voice cut through the hushed atmosphere of the lounge. "I think that's quite enough, Isabella." Liam emerged from the shadows of a nearby column, his presence instantly commanding the space. He wasn't alone. Evans was with him, and so was a woman with a stern, professional demeanor, Liam's personal lawyer, holding a digital recorder. Isabella's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "This is a private conversation." "It was a confession," Liam corrected, his voice like ice. "Soliciting stolen corporate documents, attempted possession of trade secrets, a federal crime, Isabella, all recorded." He gestured to the lawyer, who gave a slight nod. "You can't prove anything," Isabella hissed, though the panic in her eyes was unmistakable. "We have your accomplice Alistair's full testimony. We have the IT worker you both bribed. And now we have this." Liam's gaze was merciless. "Your choice is simpler than Alistair. You will leave this city. You will never contact me or anyone associated with Sterling Corp ever again. You will sign a legally binding agreement to that effect right now, or you will be arrested before you finish your overpriced martini." Isabella looked from Liam's unyielding face to the lawyer, to the imposing figure of Evans. The web she had woven had ensnared only herself. The glamorous, manipulative life she had built crumbled in an instant. The fight drained out of her, leaving a hollow, defeated woman. With a trembling hand, she scrawled her signature on the tablet the lawyer presented. Without another word, Liam turned to Alara, his expression shifting from icy wrath to profound relief. He offered her his hand. She took it, her own trembling finally ceasing as their fingers intertwined. He led her out of the lounge, away from the ruin of his past, and into the quiet promise of their future. The following days were a whirlwind of quiet resolution. Alistair, true to his coerced word, retracted his bid and issued a humiliating public apology that sent OmniCorp stock plummeting and Sterling Corp soaring. The board, thoroughly chastened, offered Liam their full and unwavering support. The story in the press was one of corporate intrigue and a CEO's brilliant handling of a malicious attack. The name Alara Willow was never publicly mentioned, protected by the formidable shield of Liam's influence. A week after the storm had passed, Liam stood once more in the archives. This time there was no crisis, no security breach, only the gentle, dusty silence and the woman he loved, carefully restoring a fragile, century-old map. "Alara," he said softly. She turned, and the smile that lit up her face was more radiant than any city skyline. "Liam." He didn't kneel this time. He simply walked to her, took both her hands in his, and looked into her eyes, the honeyed warmth he now called home. "It's over. It's really over." "I know," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "The board, the company, they all see it now. They see what I see. They see your strength, your integrity." He paused, his thumb stroking her cheek. But more importantly, I see you, and I don't ever want to look away. He reached into his pocket, and this time there was no interruption. He pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it, just held it, his heart in his eyes. This past week, the thought of losing you was the only thing that truly terrified me. I've built empires, Alara, but you built a home in my heart. A real, lasting home. Will you stay? Forever. Alara looked from the box to his face, seeing the vulnerable boy behind the powerful man, the man who had fought a dragon for her. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She didn't need to see the ring. She already had her answer. Yes, she breathed, her voice steady and sure. 1,000 times yes. As he finally slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple, elegant diamond that sparkled with a light that rivaled the stars, the last of the walls around Liam Sterling's heart crumbled to dust, not with a crash, but with a gentle, grateful sigh. In the quiet of the archives, surrounded by the stories of the past, they began their own, a story that promised to be the most authentic, most cherished, and most beautifully real one of all. And as they stood there, wrapped in the certainty of their love, the only question that remained was how many pages their own forever would hold. The gentle click of the velvet box closing was the only sound in the vast, silent archives, a perfect full stop to the chaos that had preceded it. For a long moment, they simply stood there, Liam and Alara, his forehead resting against hers, their intertwined hands the bridge between his world of power and hers of quiet strength. The ring on her finger felt not like a weight, but a key, unlocking a future they would now build together. A future written not in corporate memos or financial forecasts, but in the simple, profound language of shared mornings and quiet understanding. The world outside, of course, did not simply stop. There were questions, of course, curious glances and whispered speculations that turned to genuine, if surprised, congratulations as the news of their engagement filtered through the corporate grapevine. Liam handled it with a new, unshakable grace. He didn't hide her away or stage manage her introduction to his life. Instead, he brought her into it, not as an accessory, but as his partner. He watched with a fierce, proud joy as she navigated a formal charity dinner, not with Isabella's polished artifice, but with a genuine curiosity that charmed the stuffiest of philanthropists. She tripped on the hem of her gown once, and instead of the expected horror, she laughed, a sound so free and unburdened it made several hardened business magnates smile. Liam simply caught her, his arm around her waist a permanent promise, and in that moment everyone saw it. He wasn't with her despite her clumsiness. He was with her because her authenticity was the rarest treasure he had ever found. Their wedding was not a society spectacle, but a reflection of them. It was held not in a cathedral, but in the sun-drenched courtyard of the corporate library, surrounded by the very books that had been her sanctuary. Alara walked down an aisle strewn with petals from her own window-box flowers, on the arm of the night shift security guard, who had been one of her first friends in the building. She wore a simple, elegant dress, and in her hair, tucked beside her veil, was a single, whimsical paperclip, a private tribute to the moment that had started it all. Liam's vows were not grand pronouncements, but quiet promises spoken in a voice thick with emotion. He promised to always catch her when she stumbled, to cherish the quiet moments as much as the grand ones, and to spend a lifetime learning the beautiful, intricate map of her heart. Alara's vows, spoken in her soft, clear voice, promised him a home filled with real laughter and unwavering trust, a place where he could finally, truly, take off his armor and just be. Their honeymoon was a tour of the ancient libraries of Europe, a dream she had confessed to him over their first dinner. He watched, his heart full, as she moved through the hallowed halls of Oxford and the rustic charm of a monastery library in Portugal with the same reverent awe. She didn't just see the books, she felt their stories, her clumsy hands gentle as a feather on centuries-old parchment. In a quiet corner of a library in Vienna, she turned to him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "You built me a world from my dreams," she whispered. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a joyful tear. "No, my love," he replied. "You taught me how to dream again." Life settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. Ilara, with Liam's unwavering support, didn't abandon her love for archives. Instead, she founded the Sterling Foundation for Historical Preservation, using his resources to save crumbling libraries and digitize forgotten histories, her innate kindness and sharp intelligence making her a quietly formidable force in the cultural world. She was no longer just Ilara. She was Ilara Sterling, a woman whose gentle strength had tamed a titan and whose compassionate vision was leaving its own indelible mark on the world. Liam, in turn, was transformed. The icy CEO became a leader known for his surprising empathy and his fierce loyalty. The walls around Sterling Corp came down, replaced by a culture of transparency and trust that, to the board's astonishment, only increased productivity and innovation. He delegated more, trusting his team the way he had learned to trust Ilara. He came home at a reasonable hour, his briefcase often left at the office, his priority now the woman waiting for him, who would often greet him with a flower-dusted smile from a new baking experiment or a story about a rare manuscript she had discovered. Years later, on a quiet Sunday morning in their sunlit kitchen, the scene was one of perfect domestic chaos. A little girl with her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's determined chin sat at the table, carefully, if messily, attempting to draw. Ilara, her hair in a loose bun, a few graceful streaks of silver at her temples, was humming as she flipped pancakes, a task that still held an element of thrilling danger. Liam, his own hair slightly grayer, his face softer with laughter lines, sat with the newspaper, but his eyes weren't on the financial section. They were on his wife, watching the way the morning light caught the simple diamond on her finger, the way she moved with a confidence that had grown from his steadfast love. Their daughter, Clara, looked up from her drawing, a fierce frown of concentration on her face. "Mummy, I spilled the crayons." Ilara turned, a warm smile gracing her lips. "That's quite all right, my love. We'll just pick them up together." She walked over, her gait steadier now but still possessing a gentle, unstudied grace, and knelt, beginning to gather the scattered colors. Liam watched them, his heart so full he thought it might burst. This was the empire he was proudest of. This was the legacy that mattered. He stood and joined them on the floor, his large hand covering Ilara, as they both reached for the same blue crayon. Their eyes met, and in that glance was a lifetime of understanding, of chaos averted and crises overcome, of whispered secrets and shared laughter, of a love that had been stumbled upon in a crowded lobby and had, against all odds, built a fortress of happiness that no outside force could ever breach. Clara giggled, grabbing both their hands. "Family hug," she declared. And as they wrapped their arms around each other, a tangle of limbs and love on the kitchen floor, surrounded by spilled crayons and the scent of vanilla and pancakes, Liam knew. He had spent his life building monuments of steel and glass, but the greatest thing he would ever build was this simple, perfect moment, with the clumsy, shy girl who had fallen into his arms and in doing so had taught his heart how to fly. The story of the cold CEO and the shy archivist was no longer just a story. It was their life, a beautiful, ongoing, and wonderfully real adventure, with a forever that stretched as far as the heart could see. The spilled crayons were not a crisis, but a kaleidoscope of color scattered across the polished floor, a testament to the vibrant, joyful chaos that now defined Liam Sterling's world. As he knelt, his knee, the same one that had touched the cold archive floor in a moment shattered by accusation, now pressed into the warm, forgiving wood of his own kitchen, he felt a completeness so profound it was almost dizzying. His daughter's small, sticky hand slipped into his, and his wife's shoulder brushed against his arm, a familiar, grounding touch. This was the real boardroom, the only one that mattered. The years had woven a tapestry of such ordinary, extraordinary moments. He remembered teaching a 5-year-old Clara to ride a bicycle in the park, her wobbling determination a perfect mirror of her mother. Ilara had run alongside them, her laughter ringing out, not a trace of self-consciousness as she too stumbled on a loose piece of gravel, tumbling into a heap of giggles on the grass. Liam had caught Clara, his heart in his throat, and then turned to help his wife, pulling them both into a grass-stained, triumphant hug. The fear that had once gripped him, the fear of loss, of betrayal, had been slowly, irrevocably replaced by a steadfast certainty. His love for them was the one stock that would never crash, the one deal that would always yield immeasurable returns. Ilara's foundation had flourished, becoming a beacon in the world of cultural preservation. She traveled occasionally, but never for long, and Liam often rearranged his own formidable schedule to accompany her, finding a strange peace in the dusty, silent company of ancient texts. He was no longer just a financier. He was a patron, a protector of stories because he understood now that the most important stories weren't always written in ledgers, but in the quiet legacy of kindness his wife was building. He watched her give a speech at a gala for the foundation, her voice initially soft, then gaining strength as she spoke about a collection of letters from wartime sweethearts she had helped save. She didn't stumble over her words. She owned them. And the crowd, filled with people who had once whispered about her, listened in rapt silence, captivated by her genuine passion. On the eve of Clara's 10th birthday, a minor crisis emerged. The elaborate three-tiered castle cake Ilara had spent 2 days meticulously crafting, a testament to her daughter's current obsession with knights and dragons, met with a familiar fate. Reaching for a stray sprinkle, Ilara's elbow caught the edge of the turret, sending a section of the sugary fortress sliding to the counter in a glorious, crumbling disaster. There was a moment of stunned silence in the kitchen. Clara's eyes welled up with tears. But Liam, who had once seen such chaos as a fatal flaw, now saw it as an opportunity for a different kind of magic. "Wait," he said, his voice calm. He fetched a tube of green icing and a bag of chocolate rocks. With a few strategic strokes, he transformed the collapsed turret into a magnificent dragon-guarded cave, the chocolate rocks forming a path to its entrance. Ilara, her initial horror melting into laughter, added a tiny, icing sword-wielding knight at the cave's mouth. Clara's tears vanished, replaced by awe. "It's better," she declared. "The dragon tried to eat the castle, but the knight saved it." That night, as they ate the lopsided, story-filled cake, Liam realized that Ilara hadn't just brought authenticity into his life. She had brought resilience, the kind that could turn any disaster into a new adventure. The true test of that resilience came not from corporate rivals, but from the inevitable passage of time. Liam's mother, Elinor, a woman of sharp edges and higher society, had never fully warmed to Ilara. She saw the clumsiness as a lack of breeding and the shyness as a lack of spirit. During a family holiday gathering, with Clara now a discerning 12-year-old, Elinor made a cutting remark about Ilara's choice of a homemade, slightly lopsided gingerbread house over the pristine, professionally made one she had brought. "Really, Ilara, must everything be so rustic?" Elinor said, her voice dripping with condescension. Before Liam could intercede, Clara, her young face set in a fierce expression that was all her father, spoke up. "Grandmother," she said, her voice clear and steady, "Mummy's gingerbread house has love in the icing. Yours just has perfection, and perfection is boring." The room fell silent. Ilara placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, not to silence her, but in solidarity. She looked at her mother-in-law not with anger, but with a gentle pity. "It's true, Elinor," she said softly. "I've never been very good at perfect, but I am very, very good at love." It was a watershed moment. Liam, looking at the 3 generations of women in his life, saw the unassailable strength of the family he and Ilara had built. His mother, for the first time, seemed to truly see it too. The hard lines of her face softened, and she gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't apologize, but she never made such a remark again. Slowly, tentatively, a new, more respectful relationship began to grow. As Clara grew into a young woman, her own personality emerged, a captivating blend of her father's strategic mind and her mother's empathetic heart. She was coordinated where her mother was clumsy, outgoing where Alara was reserved, but she possessed the same core of unwavering kindness. She became her mother's fiercest defender and her father's most astute advisor, often seeing solutions to problems that his seasoned executives missed. On her 18th birthday, she announced she would be majoring in nonprofit management and archival science, a decision that filled both her parents with a pride so immense it was palpable. One autumn evening, with Clara away at university, Liam and Alara found themselves back in the Sterling Corp archives, now vastly expanded and renamed the Willow Wing in her honor. They were there to dedicate a new digital restoration lab. The space was empty, the hushed silence a familiar, comforting blanket. They stood before the very shelf where he had once found her on that rolling ladder, a lifetime ago. "It all started here," Alara murmured, a wistful smile on her lips, "with a falling girl and a very startled CEO." Liam took her hand, the skin now softer, marked with the gentle traces of time, the paperclip from their wedding day preserved in a small frame on her office desk. "No," he corrected her, his voice thick with emotion. "It started here with a falling man who just didn't know it yet. You didn't just fall into my arms, Alara. You caught me. You caught me when I was falling through a life that had no meaning, no heart. You were my net." Tears glistened in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound gratitude. They had weathered storms, both public and private. They had faced down betrayals and navigated the complex currents of family. Through it all, their love had not just endured. It had deepened, its roots growing so strong and so deep that no force on earth could ever shake them. He leaned in and kissed her, there amidst the quiet stories of the past, a kiss that held the weight and wonder of their shared history. It was a promise that their story was far from over, that every new chapter, with its potential for spilled crayons or crumbling cake, would be faced together. The clumsy girl and the cold CEO were now just a man and a woman, partners in every sense of the word, their lives a testament to the power of a love that was real, a love that was resilient, a love that was, and would always be, perfectly, beautifully, messily theirs. And as they walked out of the archives, hand in hand, the setting sun casting long, golden shadows behind them, the only cliffhanger that remained was the delightful, certain promise of all the tomorrows they would continue to write together.